The day they laid Mark to rest was the coldest November on record, or so the news anchors kept saying. But the cold I felt had nothing to do with weather. It had settled into my bones 3 weeks earlier, when a police officer appeared at my door on a Tuesday afternoon, and I knew before he opened his mouth that my world had ended. That cold was permanent. It was the temperature of the void where Mark used to be. I stood in the front row of the small chapel, held upright by forces I couldn't name. My body was there in black clothing I didn't remember buying, my hand gripping the arm of Mark's brother Ethan, with a desperation that must have hurt him though. He never flinched. Ethan had flown in from Denver the day after it happened, and hadn't left my side since. A quiet, solid presence who looked so much like Mark it sometimes stole my breath. He was the reason I was upright at all. The priest's words floated toward me from somewhere far away, a soothing murmur I couldn't grasp. I wanted to feel something other than the hollow numbness in my chest, but the words slipped through me like water. People cried around me. Someone sobbed so loudly the sound echoed off the wooden rafters. Mark's mother had to be escorted out twice. I registered all of it the way you register weather in a dream, present, but not real. What I could focus on, what my eyes kept returning to no matter how I tried to look away, were the 2 empty seats in the second row. The seats reserved for my parents, the seats marked with small white cards that read, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, in elegant calligraphy. Those seats sat empty through the entire service, 2 dark voids in a sea of mourners. Every time my gaze landed on them, something sharp and hot tried to poke through the ice around my heart. I pushed it back down. I couldn't afford to feel that yet. My mother had called the night before. I remembered every word with crystalline clarity. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with Ethan, a plate of untouched food between us, when my phone buzzed with her name. Clara, sweetie, she had said, her voice thin and reedy in that way it got when she wanted to sound fragile. Your father and I have been talking, and we just can't. The funeral, I mean. We can't come. The grief is just too much for us to bear. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean you can't come? We've made an appointment with Dr. Albright, she continued, and I heard my father's voice in the background murmuring agreement. He's a psychiatrist, very highly recommended. We need professional help to process all of this. Dr. Albright says we have to prioritize our mental health, and his first available appointment is tomorrow afternoon. You understand, don't you? You want us to be well, don't you? I understood. I understood that my mother had made Mark's death about her. I understood they were choosing a first appointment with a stranger over saying goodbye to the man who had been my husband for 4 years. I understood they were making a choice, and that choice was not me. But I was too numb to argue, too hollow to scream, too frozen to point out that my mother had called Mark, unmotivated, at our wedding reception, that my father had suggested I reconsider my life choices before it was too late to have children with someone more suitable. All I could do was say, okay, I understand. Then I hung up. Ethan stared at me with disbelief. They're processing their grief by missing the funeral. What grief? They barely tolerated him. I just shook my head. It was easier to believe they were broken than to face the uglier truth. The funeral passed in a blur after that. I shook hands I couldn't see, accepted embraces I couldn't feel, murmured thank yous to faces that blurred together. Through it all, Ethan stayed close, his hand a warm pressure on my back, guiding me through the worst day of my life. Afterward, when the last mourner had finally left, Ethan drove me to my parents' house. I needed to see them. I needed my mother. Despite everything, the empty pews, the phone call, the years of thinly veiled disapproval, I needed my mother to hold me and tell me it would be okay. We pulled into their driveway at dusk. Ethan looked at me. You want me to come in? I shook my head and walked up the path alone. My mother opened the door. She was wearing a soft lavender cashmere sweater, her hair freshly styled, her makeup immaculate. She looked like she was about to host a book club, not like a woman who had just missed her son-in-law's funeral. Behind her, I could see my father in his armchair, a cup of tea steaming beside him, the Wall Street Journal open on his lap. They looked peaceful. They looked content. My mother pulled me into an embrace with precisely the right pressure, her cheek pressed to mine at exactly the correct angle. "Oh, my darling girl. Was it just awful?" She led me inside, settled me on the couch, pressed tea into my hands. My father set down his paper and regarded me with an expression I couldn't name. Concern, maybe, but with something else underneath. "The session was so hard," my mother said, sitting beside me. "Dr. Albright really put us through it. Your father was a mess. Absolutely a mess." My father nodded. "Your mother was in a bad way. We did what we had to do. Dr. Albright says we can't pour from an empty cup." Their words were soft, their tones gentle, their faces arranged in loving concern. But their eyes were dry. Not a trace of redness, not a hint of recent tears. They looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. In that moment, sitting on their expensive couch in my funeral clothes, holding tea I would never drink, something shifted inside me. The ice around my heart didn't crack, it developed a single, tiny fissure. A hairline fracture through which something sharp and hot began to seep. Something that felt dangerously like the beginning of knowing. In the weeks that followed the funeral, my parents' concern became a suffocating fog. They were at my apartment constantly. And at first I told myself this was normal, what families did in times of crisis. My mother would show up with casseroles she didn't know how to cook, bought. I realized later, the labels removed. She would wander through my space, opening cabinets, peering into the bedroom, her eyes cataloging everything. My father came with her most times, settling on my couch with his laptop, supposedly working remotely to be there for me. But I would catch him watching me, his gaze following my movements with a clinical detachment that felt nothing like paternal concern. "You haven't been sleeping, have you, sweetie?" My mother would coo, her head tilted at exactly the angle of sympathy. I hadn't been sleeping, it was true. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark. So I stayed awake, walking through the house at 3 a.m., touching his tools in the garage, his jacket still hanging by the door. "You seem so disconnected." My mother would continue. "Dr. Albright says that's a common symptom of complicated grief." Dr. Albright. His name came up in every conversation now, a talisman they waved to give their words authority. "Dr. Albright says grief manifests differently. Dr. Albright recommends a support structure. Dr. Albright believes in early intervention." They spoke of him with the fervent certainty of people who have found answers to questions no one asked. I started noticing other things. The way my mother would subtly correct my memories. "You and Mark were having such difficulties before the accident, remember? You told me you were worried about the marriage." I had never said anything of the sort. The way my father would bring up finances at every opportunity. "Have you looked into the debt? That house must be too much alone. Mark didn't have much of a safety net, did he?" Small comments, dropped like seeds, designed to grow into doubts. Then the letters started arriving. The first came in a plain white envelope with my parents' lawyer's return address. They were contesting Mark's life insurance policy, the one that would cover our remaining mortgage, the one that named me as sole beneficiary. My parents claimed Mark had verbally promised to help them with their retirement security, and that I was in no mental state to manage the money. I laughed when I finally understood. A hollow, broken sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. Mark had despised my parents. The idea that he would promise them a dime was so absurd it circled back to being almost funny. The second letter arrived 3 days later. It outlined my parents' concerns about my mental stability, insomnia, weight loss, social withdrawal, unusual emotional responses to their visits. They cited Dr. Albright's preliminary assessment, though no assessment had ever been conducted with me present. They requested I voluntarily submit to a psychiatric evaluation to determine if I could manage my own affairs. And they hinted that if I refused, they would explore other options to protect me from my own impaired judgment. I went to see them that same day, the letter crumpled in my shaking fist. I found them in the study, and I wasn't alone. Sitting across from my father, in the leather armchair usually reserved for guests, was a man I didn't recognize. Impeccably dressed, silver hair perfectly styled, face arranged in professional calm. Dr. Albright. He held a leather notebook and looked at me the way a predator looks at prey that has wandered into its territory. "Clara, perfect timing," my father said, rising with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were just discussing you. Clara, this is Dr. Albright." Dr. Albright extended a hand. His grip was cool and dry, his eye contact perfectly measured. Everything about him was calibrated to inspire trust, and everything about him made my skin crawl. My mother appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sweetie, we didn't expect you. But this is wonderful. Dr. Albright was just explaining how we can help you." I held up the letter. "Is this how you help me?" "By trying to take my husband's insurance money. By suggesting I'm mentally incompetent." My mother gasped, a hand fluttering to her chest. "You see, doctor, the paranoia, the aggression." Dr. Albright nodded, making a note in his book. "These outbursts are typical in cases of unresolved trauma, Clara. Your parents aren't your enemies. They want to help you, perhaps through a temporary conservatorship, just to manage your affairs until you're well." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Conservatorship. I knew what that meant. Families using legal guardianships to strip loved ones of autonomy, seize assets, control every aspect of their lives. My parents weren't trying to help me. They were trying to erase me. They weren't concerned about my grief. They were exploiting it. I looked at each of them in turn. My father behind his desk like a CEO preparing to fire an employee. My mother frozen in her performance of shock. Dr. Albright watching me with calm interest. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The grief was still there, a permanent weight. The numbness was still there, a buffer against pain. But underneath both, something new was growing. Something cold and sharp and utterly focused. They thought I was broken. They thought grief had made me weak, pliable, easy to manipulate. They thought they could walk into the wreckage of my life and pick through the pieces while I stood by too shattered to stop them. They thought they knew me. They thought they knew what I was capable of. They were wrong. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a single tear. I simply looked at each of them, my father with his false concern, my mother with her theatrical worry, the psychiatrist with his predatory calm, and I walked out. I walked out of their house, down their perfectly manicured path, to my car. And I drove home. But I didn't go home to cry into my pillow or curl up in Mark's closet where his smell still lingered. I went home to work. I went home to plan. I went home to become the woman they would soon wish they had never underestimated. The drive home from my parents' house was a blur, but something had changed inside me. The fog of grief that had wrapped itself around every thought since Mark died had lifted just enough for me to see clearly. What I saw was a battlefield, and I had been standing on it unarmed while my enemies advanced. That ended now. I found my phone and called Ethan before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough, with sleep, despite the early evening hour. I told him everything, the conservatorship threat, Dr. Albright's presence, the way they'd all looked at me like I was already defeated. I spoke calmly, methodically, the words coming out flat but clear. When I finished, Ethan was silent for a long moment. Clara, a psychiatrist they just started seeing, already willing to back a conservatorship. That's not how any of this works. It takes months of evaluations, a paper trail, documented proof. They had to have been planning this for a while. They had to have a doctor lined up long before they ever mentioned it to you. Long before Mark. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication hung between us, heavy and horrible. Long before Mark died. Long before that distracted driver plowed into his car on a random Tuesday afternoon. I ended the call shortly after, promising to keep him updated. But my mind was already racing ahead, connecting dots I hadn't known existed. I spent the rest of that night doing something I hadn't done since Mark died. I used my brain. The one Mark had always said was sharper than I gave myself credit for. I started with Dr. Albright. It took less than an hour to find his professional profile online, his credentials, his listed specialties. And there it was, in black and white. His practice wasn't general psychiatry. He specialized in geriatric psychiatry, estate planning consultations, and family mediation. He was less a healer and more a hired gun for wealthy families who wanted to lock away difficult relatives and control their assets. Reviews from grateful family members praised his ability to navigate complex family dynamics and ensure vulnerable loved ones received care. I recognized the language. It was the same language my parents had used. The language of control dressed up as concern. I dug deeper and found a court case from 5 years ago, a conservatorship battle that had been quietly settled. The family's name was redacted, but Dr. Albright's name appeared as a witness for the adult children seeking to control their elderly mother's estate. The case had been dismissed, but the pattern was there. This was what he did. Building cases against people so their families could take what they wanted. I remembered something then. Something Mark had said a few months before he died. We'd been lying in bed on a Sunday morning when he'd muttered, half asleep, "Saw your dad at the country club yesterday with some doctor type. Weird. Your dad never laughs like that. Looked like they were old friends." I dismissed it at the time. My father had a million country club acquaintances. It meant nothing. But now, with Dr. Albright's face fresh in my mind, it meant everything. They hadn't just met after Mark died. They'd known each other for months. They'd been planning this for months. While Mark was alive, while he was in their way. The thought opened a door in my mind, and through it came a flood of memories. My father's pointed questions about our finances. My mother's comments about how burdened I seemed. The way they'd both looked at Mark sometimes, not with the mild disdain I'd always assumed, but with something sharper. Something that looked almost like hatred. He was the reason they couldn't get to me. He was the wall between them and everything they wanted. And then, suddenly, he wasn't. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The air pressed against my lungs. I gripped the edge of my laptop until my fingers ached, until the pain brought me back. No, I couldn't go there. Not yet, not without proof. I spent the next 3 days as a ghost, moving through my life while my real self was deep in a digital rabbit hole. I searched for connections between my parents and Dr. Albright that predated Mark's death. I found nothing at first. My parents were careful people. But everyone makes mistakes. Everyone leaves a trail somewhere. I found the trail on the 4th day, and I found it because of Mark. He'd had a habit of backing up his phone photos to a shared cloud folder, a digital scrapbook of our life together. I'd forgotten about it completely in the weeks since his death. But on that 4th day, desperate for something of him, I logged in. The folder was full of photos I hadn't seen in years. Our wedding, our kitten, vacations and lazy Sundays. I scrolled through them with tears streaming down my face. And then, about halfway through, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a picture of a piece of paper on a coffee table. My parents' coffee table. I recognized the grain of the wood, the coasters my mother had bought in Italy. The paper was covered in handwriting I knew as well as my own. My father's sharp, angular script. On that paper, in that handwriting, were notes. Notes that made the world tilt sideways. Dr. Albright, initial consult fee $5K. Retainer agreement signed 30/15. Timeline. 6-9 months for full assessment and court readiness. Approach grief-induced instability after loss of husband. Document all incidents. Target. Full financial control, including house, insurance, inheritance. Current obstacle mark. Reevaluate strategy after obstacle removed. The date on the photo was from 6 months ago. 6 months before Mark died. 6 months before that distracted driver. 6 months before my world ended. I stared at the image until my eyes burned, until the letters blurred, until I couldn't see anything but those final words. A current obstacle mark. Reevaluate strategy after obstacle removed. The photo had been taken accidentally. Mark must have set his phone down, triggered the camera without meaning to. And in that random accident, he had captured the blueprint for my destruction. He had captured the evidence that would save me. Even from the grave, without knowing what he'd done, Mark had given me the weapon I needed. My blood didn't just run cold. It crystallized. It turned to ice in my veins. Sharp and permanent and utterly clarifying. Mark hadn't just been an obstacle to their plans. He had been the only thing standing between them and everything I had. And then, 6 months after that note was written, he was gone. Removed. Eliminated from the equation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in my bedroom. in the house Mark built for us, and I stared at that photo for a long, long time. And when I finally looked away, when I finally closed my laptop and stood on legs that felt steadier than they had in weeks, I knew exactly what I had to do. My parents had spent months planning my destruction. They had underestimated me, underestimated my grief, underestimated the man I'd married and the evidence he'd left behind. It was time to show them exactly how wrong they were. The photo sat on my phone like a live grenade, and for 3 days I did nothing but stare at it. I zoomed in on my father's handwriting, read and reread those damning words until I could recite them in my sleep. Current obstacle mark. Reevaluate strategy after obstacle removed. The phrase became a mantra, a prayer, a curse. I thought about calling the police, about throwing the phone in my parents' faces. But I did none of that. Instead, I called Ethan. He came over that same night, and I watched his face transform as he read the words on my screen. First confusion, then comprehension, then cold fury. "This is from 6 months ago," he said quietly. "6 months before the accident." I nodded. He set the phone down carefully. "I know someone. A lawyer. She specializes in elder abuse and financial predation cases. If anyone can help us, it's her." The lawyer's name was Patricia Chen, and she agreed to meet us the next day. She was a small woman with sharp eyes, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything: the funeral, the psychiatrist, the conservatorship threat, the photo. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair. "Show me the picture," she said. I handed her my phone. She studied it for a full minute, then looked up. "This is good. It establishes intent and timeline. But it's not enough on its own. We need to catch them in the act of trying to implement this plan. We need them to commit to the conspiracy in a way that can't be explained away." "How do we do that?" A thin smile curved her lips. "We give them what they want. Or at least, we make them think we're giving them what they want." The plan was simple but terrifying. I would agree to the family meeting my parents had been pushing for. I would appear broken, defeated, ready to accept their help. I would let them bring Dr. Albright, and I would wear a wire. "No," Ethan said immediately. "That's too dangerous. They won't suspect anything," Patricia replied calmly. "They think Clara is a grieving widow on the verge of a breakdown. They think they've already won. Arrogance is the enemy of caution. They'll say things they shouldn't." The meeting was set for 3 days later at my parents' house. I spent those 3 days preparing. I practiced looking broken. The hollow gaze, the trembling hands, the hesitant speech. I wore the same clothes I'd worn to the funeral, unwashed and wrinkled. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what they wanted to see: a woman destroyed by grief, too weak to fight. Patricia fitted me with a recording device disguised as a button on my blouse. "Just forget it's there. Go in, let them talk, and get out. Ethan will be waiting around the corner. If anything feels wrong, you leave immediately." The drive to my parents' house felt like a journey to my own execution. I parked in their driveway and sat for a long moment, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I walked inside. They were waiting in the living room, arranged like a tableau from a nightmare. My father in his armchair, my mother on the couch, Dr. Albright in the guest chair with his leather notebook already open. The stage was set. "Clara, sweetie." My mother rose and embraced me with theatrical pressure. "We're so glad you came." I let myself slump against her, let her feel the weight of my supposed defeat. Then I sank onto the couch, eyes downcast, hands folded. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the conservatorship. I think maybe I do need help. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't think straight." My father and Dr. Albright exchanged a quick glance. Triumph. They tried to hide it, but I saw it in the slight relaxation of my father's shoulders. Dr. Albright leaned forward. "Clara, a temporary conservatorship will allow your parents to manage your affairs while you focus on healing. Once you're well, everything will be returned to you. Everything. The house. The insurance money." My father cleared his throat. "Well, the house is too big for you alone. Too many memories. We think it might be best to sell it, use the proceeds to set up a more manageable living situation." "Debts?" I looked up. "What debts?" Mark and I didn't have any debt except the mortgage. My mother's hand squeezed my knee, a little too hard. Oh, sweetie. There are always debts you don't know about. Mark wasn't always honest with you about finances, was he? Men like that, they hide things. Men like that. The casual cruelty nearly broke my composure. Men who worked with their hands. Men who weren't good enough for their daughter. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Dr. Albright continued. The insurance money will be held in trust, managed by your parents until you're deemed capable of handling it yourself. Of course, I whispered. That makes sense. The room relaxed. I felt it like a physical shift. They thought they had me. My father leaned back smug. My mother's hand became almost affectionate. Albright made a note in his book. There's just one more thing, I said quietly. They all looked at me. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. From it, I slid a single 8x10 photograph onto the coffee table. The photo from Mark's cloud, enlarged and printed on glossy paper. It sat in the center of the table like a bomb. My father's face went from smug to ashen in less than a second. My mother gasped, a real gasp this time. Dr. Albright's pen stopped moving. What is that? Dr. Albright asked, his composure cracking. A bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. That, I said, my voice no longer small or broken but steady and clear, is a picture of my husband's evidence. Evidence that you, father, were plotting to have me declared mentally unfit and steal my inheritance months before Mark died. Months before he was obstacle number one. My mother found her voice. Clara, that's not. You don't understand. That was just preliminary planning. You were worried about me so much that you paid a psychiatrist $5,000 6 months ago. You were worried about me so much that you wrote down a timeline for my destruction. You were worried about me so much that you identified my husband as an obstacle that needed to be removed. Dr. Albright stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Sit down. The voice came from behind me. Patricia Chen stood in the doorway. Behind her, through the front window, a police car was pulling into the driveway. The meeting isn't over. I'm Clara's attorney, and I've been listening to every word. She held up her phone, showing a waveform moving on the screen. All of it. Crystal clear. The doorbell rang. I stood up, steady on my feet for the first time in weeks. I looked at my father, frozen in his chair, shock and fear on his face. I looked at my mother, whose theatrical fragility had vanished, replaced by something hard and defeated. I looked at Dr. Albright, whose professional calm had shattered completely. I'm going to answer the door now. There are 2 detectives out there, with a warrant for Dr. Albright's arrest. They also have questions for you both. About the planning. About the timeline. About what happened to Mark. My mother lunged for me, but Patricia stepped between us. Clara, you can't do this. We're your parents. We love you. I looked at her and felt nothing. No anger, no hatred. Just vast, empty clarity. No. Everything you did was for you. And now you get to face the consequences. I walked to the front door and opened it. 2 detectives stood on the porch. Behind them, I could see Ethan's car at the curb, and through the windshield he gave me a small nod. We had done it. The trap had worked. Justice was finally within reach. I stepped aside and let them in. The aftermath of that day unfolded like a nightmare viewed from outside my own body. Dr. Albright was arrested first, his composure completely gone as the detectives led him out in handcuffs. He glanced back at me once, his eyes filled with hatred and disbelief. I watched him go without a flicker of sympathy. My parents were not arrested that day, though the detectives made it clear they would need to come for questioning. The look on my father's face as they left, his empire of control crumbling, his carefully constructed plans exposed, was something I would carry forever. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was something quieter. Something like the first deep breath after months of suffocation. The scandal was quiet but devastating. Dr. Albright lost his license within months. The state medical board moving with unusual speed once Patricia presented the recording and evidence of his history with conservatorship cases. He faced criminal charges for fraud and coercion. He would spend years in prison, his reputation destroyed, his career in ashes. I read about his sentencing and felt nothing but mild satisfaction that he would never do to another family what he had tried to do to mine. My parents fared little better, though never charged with anything directly related to Mark's accident. The other driver remained solely responsible, his blood alcohol level too high for any other explanation. The investigation exposed everything. Their claim on Mark's insurance policy was dismissed with prejudice, the judge making pointed comments about predatory behavior toward a grieving widow. Their attempt to gain control of my life through conservatorship became public knowledge, and the court of public opinion was far less forgiving. They lost friends. They lost status. They lost the carefully constructed image of perfect, concerned parents. My mother's bridge club quietly uninvited her. My father's business partners grew distant. The country club where he'd first met Dr. Albright sent a letter requesting his resignation. In a few months, their fortress of social standing crumbled to dust. I haven't spoken to them since that day in their living room. They've tried to reach out. Letters arrived at first, full of blame, shifting, and false apologies. My mother wrote that they'd only wanted to protect me, that grief had made me paranoid. My father's letters were colder, demanding, then begging when his threats failed. I burned them all in the backyard fire pit Mark had built, watching the paper curl and blacken. Each letter that burned felt like another brick removed from the wall they'd built around my life. The insurance money was never touched. It sat in the bank exactly as Mark had intended, a safety net he'd created without knowing how much I would need it. I thought about what to do with it for a long time. Mark had worked so hard for that money, welding in heat and cold, coming home exhausted but satisfied. He'd wanted me to be safe. Using it for myself felt right in some ways, but also incomplete. I found the answer eventually. There was a charity in the next town over that built homes for families of fallen first responders. Mark had always had a soft spot for firefighters and police officers, people who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. He'd once spent a weekend building a wheelchair ramp for a retired firefighter who'd lost both legs in a rescue. That was who Mark was. I donated the entire insurance payout to that charity, asking only that they name one of the homes after him. The Mark Holloway House, they called it. A small plaque by the front door with his name and the dates of his short life. I went to the dedication ceremony on a warm spring day and watched a family with 2 small children receive the keys to a home they could never have afforded. The mother cried. The father shook my hand with both of his eyes bright with gratitude. And I felt, for the first time since Mark died, something that might have been peace. I still live in our house. Some days are harder than others. The first anniversary of his death nearly destroyed me, a wall of grief crashing down with the force of that long-ago Tuesday. But I survived. I survived because Mark wouldn't have wanted anything else, because the life we'd built together deserved more than my surrender. On the hardest days, I sit on the porch he built. The wood has weathered to soft gray now, and I've replaced a few boards, but the bones are still his. I sit there in the evenings, watching the sunset, feeling the November chill that will always remind me of the day we laid him to rest. And I remember. But I don't remember the empty pews anymore, or the cold betrayal, or the months of fighting. I remember the look in his eyes when he told me he loved me. I remember his laugh, loud and unself-conscious. I remember his meticulous mind, the way he documented everything, backed up everything, planned for every possibility, even the possibility that he wouldn't be there to protect me. That meticulousness saved me. His habit of backing up photos, his accidental capture of my father's plans, his love that extended beyond the grave, all of it combined to give me the weapon I needed when I had nothing else. I think about that sometimes. About how the people who loved us can still fight for us even when they're gone. About how love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. They thought grief would make me weak. My parents, Dr. Albright, everyone who ever underestimated me. They looked at my pain and saw vulnerability. They looked at my tears and saw an opening. They looked at my loss and saw an opportunity to take everything. They were wrong. Grief didn't make me weak. It hollowed me out, but what grew in that hollow space wasn't emptiness. It was strength, the kind that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The kind that looks at betrayal and says, "Not today." Not ever. The kind that rises from the ashes and builds something new. Being underestimated wasn't my weakness. It was their fatal mistake. They looked at me and saw a grieving widow, a broken daughter, a woman who had lost everything. They didn't see the woman who had loved Mark Holloway, who had learned from him that worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. They didn't see that every time they dismissed me, they were digging their own graves. I still grieve Mark. I suspect I always will. There are moments when the loss hits me like a physical blow, when I reach for him in bed and find only empty space. That grief will never fully heal, and I've stopped wanting it to. It's the price of having loved someone that much, and I would pay it 1,000 times over for one more day with him. But the grief doesn't define me anymore. It's part of my story, but not the whole story. The whole story is about love and loss and betrayal and survival. It's about a woman who thought she had nothing left and discovered she had everything that mattered. It's about finding your worth in the wreckage and refusing to let anyone take it from you again. I am Clara Holloway. I am Mark's wife. I am the woman who buried her husband and buried her parents' plans alongside him. I am the woman who learned that being underestimated is just the beginning of becoming unstoppable. And I am still here, still standing, still rising. The porch creaks beneath me as I shift in my chair. The November wind carries the scent of wood smoke and coming snow. Life goes on, it has to. And I go with it, carrying Mark with me in every breath, every memory, every moment of quiet strength. They missed the funeral. They missed the point. They missed everything that mattered. I didn't.